There is a man you have seen in every court, every council, every room where power is contested. He does not raise his voice. He does not issue threats. He does not wave authority like a banner demanding recognition. And yet, when he enters, the room shifts. Conversations adjust. Postures change. Eyes move toward him, then away, cautiously as though looking too long might cost something. You have felt this. You have watched it. And you have never been able to name what it is he possesses. I will name it for you now. It is not strength. It is not wealth. It is not even intelligence, though intelligence plays its part. What he possesses is the specific and cultivated power of being feared without ever having uttered a threat. Not the fear of a drawn sword, not the fear of a raised fist. A quieter fear, a more permanent one. The fear of a man whose reactions you cannot predict, whose patience you cannot exhaust, whose indifference you cannot survive. This is the fear that lasts. I have spent considerable years studying the architecture of power. Not in libraries, though I have spent time there. In courts, in councils, in the company of princes who rose and fell within a single decade, and in the long silence of exile, where a man has nothing but time and observation to keep him honest. I served the Florentine Republic for 14 years as Second Chancellor and Secretary of the Ten of War. I negotiated with Cesare Borgia in the field. I watched Pope Julius II maneuver the entire Italian peninsula from behind a papal throne with the patience of a surgeon and the calculation of a general. I observed Francesco Sforza build authority from nothing and watched lesser men dismantle it through vanity and noise. What I learned from all of them, from their victories and their collapses, and is this: the men who lasted were not the loudest. They were the least understood. This is not an accident. It is a method. But it requires that you first discard certain beliefs that civilization has spent considerable effort installing in you. The belief that clarity builds trust. The belief that showing warmth earns loyalty. The belief that a man who never threatens is safe from contempt. These beliefs are not wrong, precisely. They are incomplete. And in the game of power, incompleteness is a fatal condition. Let me begin at the beginning. Let me explain why the approach most men take, the approach of loud dominance, visible anger, explicit warning, and public threat, is not merely ineffective. It is actively self-destructive. I watched a lord in Romagna govern through terror of the visible kind. He shouted in councils. He made examples publicly and described what he had done in great detail. He wanted men to fear him, and they did. In the way men fear a storm. They feared him when present. The moment he departed, the whispers began. The moment his back was turned, the plotting resumed. The moment weakness showed itself, and weakness always shows itself eventually, the men he had terrorized became the men who most eagerly overthrew him. Terror of the visible kind breeds one thing above all others: the desire to be free of it. Fear built by violence fades. It also creates enemies organized by shared grievance, who wait for their moment with patience that hatred has sharpened. The prince who rules through the noise of his own rage is always one bad season away from catastrophe. His subjects are not loyal. They are suppressed, and suppression is not loyalty. It is a spring held compressed by your hand, and the moment that hand tires, the spring releases with the full force of everything it was denied. The man who makes himself feared without explicit threat operates differently. He does not compress the spring. He removes the desire to push against him at all. There is no dramatic energy to resist, no cruelty to organize against, no visible enemy to name. There is only a persistent, ambient sense that this man is not to be tested, that something invisible but reliable waits behind his calm exterior, that his response, whatever form it takes, will arrive at a time you did not anticipate. This is the core law from which everything else descends. Men do not fear what they can see coming. Men fear what they cannot read. A predictable threat is a manageable threat. A man who announces his anger gives you time to prepare. A man who explains what he will do if you cross him has handed you a map. But a man whose response is uncertain, whose calm in the face of provocation tells you nothing about what he is calculating, that man is genuinely dangerous. Because you cannot prepare for what you cannot anticipate. and you cannot anticipate what you cannot understand. The courts of Italy taught me this with great consistency. The princes who endured were not the most violent. Violence was available to all of them. They were the most opaque. They made themselves difficult to read. They cultivated a specific ambiguity around their nature that kept even their closest allies slightly uncertain. And that uncertainty performed a function no army could replicate. It maintained caution in everyone, friend and enemy alike. Here are the 7 tactics by which this condition is built and sustained. They hold because they are based not on custom or fashion, but on the structure of human psychology, which has not changed since the first city was built and the first council convened. The first tactic: abandon the performance of dominance. The man who performs dominance has already confessed weakness. Consider what a performance requires. It requires an audience. It requires approval. It requires that others witness and register and respond. And the man who raises his voice to command a room is asking the room to confirm his authority. He is making his authority conditional on the room's acknowledgement. This is a structural vulnerability that any perceptive opponent will exploit. Strip from your behavior any gesture that exists solely to signal power. The raised voice. The theatrical pause intended to intimidate. The threat delivered in plain language. Each of these is a request for recognition, and requests acknowledge need. The man who needs to be recognized as powerful is already at a disadvantage before the conversation begins. Power that requires performance is power that requires maintenance. Remove the performance. Let your actions speak over time, and let the accumulation of those actions build something that requires no performance at all. Reveal little. Don't let the gap between what you are and what they can confirm fill itself with their imagination. Their imagination will always generate something more formidable than your reality. The second tactic: cultivate unpredictability with deliberate care. I do not mean irrationality. Irrationality is disorder, and disorder serves no one. I mean the management of your behavioral pattern so that those around you cannot construct a reliable model of how you will respond. The rational man whose behavior can be predicted is a manageable obstacle. His opponents know what will provoke him and what will not. They can navigate him without friction. He is, in a sense, tame, and tame things are not feared. The rational man whose behavior cannot be predicted is something altogether different. The particular form of his response, the timing, the target, the degree, these remain uncertain. And that uncertainty creates a perpetual state of careful attention in those around him. They cannot afford to dismiss him. They cannot take him for granted. I watched Cosimo de' Medici operate according to this principle with remarkable sophistication. His intelligence was consistent, and his goals were legible to those who knew him well. But the methods he employed, the moments he chose to act or to refrain from acting, the enemies he declined to punish publicly, these created around him an air of deliberate mystery that served him throughout his life. Men did not test him because they could not calculate the cost with confidence. Do not explain your reasoning unless there is strategic advantage in doing so. Do not announce your plans. Do not telegraph your responses. When someone expects you to react with anger, respond with silence. When someone expects your approval, withhold your expression until the moment of your choosing. The less clearly you can be read, the less reliably you can be handled. The less reliably you can be handled, the more space you occupy in the calculations of those around you. That space is power. The third tactic: receive insult without acceleration. This is where most men fail. It is the most visible test of the discipline I am describing, and the one where the cost of failure is most immediately apparent. When a man insults you, openly, in a room where others are watching, every instinct drives you toward reaction. The need to defend, the need to retaliate, the need to demonstrate that you are not the kind of man who absorbs an insult without consequence. And that is precisely the trap the insult has set. The man who insulted you wants your reaction. It confirms his power over your emotional state. It tells him, and everyone watching, that he found the nerve, that you are, at your core, reactive rather than composed. And reactive men are manageable. I learned this in exile, when I was removed from my position by the Medici Restoration in 1512. Dismissed, arrested, subjected to the strappado, stripped of the office I had served for a decade and a half. I had a choice in how I carried that publicly. I could have raged. The grievance was real, the injustice considerable, but rage would have confirmed what my enemies needed to believe, that I was unstable, that I could be managed by provoking my bitterness. Instead, I wrote. I observed. I produced work that has outlasted every man who dismissed me, not because I suppressed the wound was real, but because I understood that how I absorbed it was itself a statement of character that would be remembered. When insult arrives, and it will, receive it without elevation of your voice, without any adjustment to your bearing that signals disturbance. Look at the man who delivered it, not with anger, with a calm, measuring regard that communicates nothing specific and everything general. Let the silence after his words do what no retort can accomplish. Let him stand in what he has said, and watch you not break. That look, held steady for a moment without flinching, will cost him more sleep than any response you could have offered. The fourth tactic: when punishment is required, administer it once, completely, and without announcement. Men consistently misread this principle. They read it as an endorsement of brutality. It is not. It is an endorsement of precision. Cruelty distributed slowly, in small measures, across a long period. This breeds deep hatred. Every small act of punishment is a new wound, and a man with many fresh wounds is a man perpetually reminded of his grievance. He collects. One day he presents the full account, a single, decisive correction, administered once, completely, then ended. Does something different. It demonstrates capability. It establishes consequence. And then it stops, which demonstrates that you are not interested in cruelty for its own sake, but in the maintenance of order. A man who has received such a correction and watched you return to normality understands something important. You are not controlled by anger, you are surgical. And the knowledge that you can act decisively, combined with the knowledge that you will not prolong the act beyond what is necessary, creates a specific and durable form of respect. Do not nag. Do not issue repeated warnings. Do not distribute your displeasure across a dozen small frictions. When the moment requires a response, respond fully, completely, and with deliberate calm. Then return to your baseline. The man who punishes proportionally and then genuinely moves on establishes that his punishments are about order, not ego. And a man whose actions are about order commands structural deference, not merely personal resentment. The fifth tactic: withdraw strategically. Not disappearance, not absence in the manner of defeat. The deliberate, incalculated reduction of your presence at precisely those moments when your presence would be taken for granted. What is scarce is desired. What is abundant is ignored. What is rare commands attention. What is constantly available provokes contempt. The man who is always present, always responsive, always available, has made himself common. And common things are not feared. They are used. They are expected. They are taken as given. But the man who is selectively present, who appears when he chooses, who withdraws without explanation and returns without apology, this man has made himself valuable by making himself unpredictable. His presence is an event. His absence is a question. And questions are the beginning of the discomfort that lives adjacent to fear. I employed this during the years after my removal from office, and I did not seek to reinsert myself into every conversation. I did not pursue the men who had replaced me. I withdrew, and that withdrawal accomplished, beyond the work itself, the preservation of my dignity and the cultivation of a reputation for self-possession that no public campaign could have manufactured. The man who does not need you cannot be controlled by the threat of withholding, and the man who cannot be controlled by that threat is the man you are most careful around. When you feel the pull to over-explain your absence, resist it. Let your silence speak of self-sufficiency. Let your withdrawal speak of engagements more worthy of your time. The mystery you create is more powerful than any words you could speak. The less you give, the more they want. The more you withdraw, the harder they chase. You are not disappearing. You are ascending. The sixth tactic: build your myth deliberately. Every man who inspires fear at a distance has benefited from stories told in his absence. Not stories he fabricated. Stories that arose from his actual conduct and the human tendency to amplify what is admired or feared. But the wise man understands that this process of amplification can be seeded, shaped, and managed, not through lying, but through the strategic emphasis of certain truths and the strategic omission of certain vulnerabilities. The court operates on narrative. What people believe about you governs how they approach you. A man whose story contains even one episode of decisive and unexpected action will find that episode retold with increasing embellishment at every remove. A man who once absorbed a betrayal with complete composure and addressed it with quiet, precise consequence will find that episode growing in the retelling until he seems almost prescient. He does not exaggerate, he simply ensures the original episode exists and is known. Perform your character in its most concentrated form at the moments most likely to be observed and remembered. The decision made under pressure, the insult absorbed without reaction, the correction delivered once and not repeated. These become the stones from which your reputation's fortress is built. You do not build it yourself. Others build it in the process of discussing you. Your task is only to provide the material. Never destroy this myth through carelessness. Never explain your decisions at greater length than is operationally necessary. I never expose your uncertainty before those who will remember it as a permanent condition. The myth you build is armor. Armor is not worn for comfort. It is worn because the world contains people who will strike at exposed flesh the moment they identify it. Do not identify it for them. The seventh tactic contains all the others. Make them fear not your anger. Make them fear your indifference. Consider what each condition communicates. A man whose anger you fear is a man who is engaged. His anger means you matter. His anger means your actions have reached him, moved him, disrupted his composure. Anger is engagement, and engagement implies need. The angry man depends on the actions of others to remain in equilibrium. He can be manipulated through that dependency with relative ease. But the man whose indifference you fear is something categorically different. His indifference means you do not matter. It means your actions have not reached him at the level that would produce a response. It means he has considered you and found you insufficient to disturb his attention. And that specific realization, is the deepest form of diminishment a human being can experience. It does not position you as an enemy, which is a role that carries dignity and the possibility of eventual importance. It positions you as irrelevant, as background, as furniture. The man who makes himself capable of genuine indifference, not performed indifference, not the exaggerated coldness of a man pretending not to care while his jaw tightens, but the actual, trained, practiced capacity to direct his attention elsewhere. If that man has made the one thing all human beings most deeply fear his primary instrument of social order. Study this carefully, not the performance of it, the attainment of it. The man who performs indifference is still reacting, still adjusting his behavior in response to the other person. He is simply adjusting it in a direction meant to signal non-reaction. This is still engagement. The other person, if observant, can feel it, can sense that beneath the performance, something still stirs. True indifference is attained only through a genuine reconfiguration of priority, through the cultivation of purposes so significant that the smaller provocations of ordinary social life do not register at the level of disturbance. A man deeply engaged in consequential work, a man with clear values and clear direction, a man who has confronted his own nature with sufficient honesty to no longer require external confirmation of his worth. This man does not perform indifference. He simply has it, because his attention is genuinely elsewhere. When such a man is insulted, the insult does not access the depth where disturbance lives. He may note it. He may file it for later strategic consideration. But in the moment, his expression changes less than those watching expect it to change. And that gap between expectation and reality is the most disturbing thing they have ever witnessed. It confirms what they most feared, that to this man, they are small. In every court, at every level of human organization, what people fear above all else, above physical harm, above public humiliation, is irrelevance. They fear being looked through rather than looked at. They fear the discovery that the person whose regard they seek does not seek theirs in return. The indifference of the powerful is the social equivalent of a sentence. It declares, you do not exist in the territory that matters. This fear is chronic. It does not resolve. It does not respond to efforts to resolve it. Because the man who employs it correctly never confirms resolution. He continues to be occasionally warm and occasionally withdrawn, occasionally engaged and occasionally distant, in a pattern that cannot be mapped, that refuses to stabilize into the predictable regard the other person needs. And that perpetual need, perpetually unmet, produces a form of careful, attentive management of behavior around him that is, in all functional respects, indistinguishable from fear. I now understand the cost of failing to adopt these principles. The man who builds fear through volume and threat is exhausted by it. He must maintain the performance constantly. Every room requires the same investment of energy. Every relationship requires the same assertion of dominance. And the moment the performance falters, through illness, through misfortune, through the ordinary attrition of sustained effort, the fear collapses, because it was never about him. It was about the performance. Remove the performance, and there is nothing underneath to sustain the authority. I watched this with particular clarity in the Italy of my era, when condottieri, who had built their reputations entirely on theatrical fury, found themselves abandoned the moment fortune turned against them. Their men had never followed them. Their men had feared them, and fear of the visible kind lasts only as long as the thing being feared remains a credible threat. The moment it did not, the men fled to the next credible performance. The condottiere was left with nothing, not even loyalty, because he had never cultivated loyalty. He had cultivated only what required constant renewal. The man who builds fear through the methods I have described builds something structural, something that exists independently of his moment-to-moment performance. It lives in the minds of those around him as a persistent background condition, a constant low register of uncertainty about what he knows, what he is capable of, what he will choose to notice. That uncertainty does not require maintenance. It requires only that he never, through carelessness or vanity, to dispel it by becoming fully legible. The world will try to make you legible. It will ask questions designed not to inform but to map you. It will create provocations designed not to harm but to measure the parameters of your response. It will offer flattery and observe whether you consume it. Every social interaction is, at some level, an attempt to determine what you want, what you fear, and what you can be offered in order to be managed. The man who answers these questions fully and honestly hands over his strategic position without knowing it. He becomes a known quantity, and known quantities are managed, become unknown, not in the sense of obscurity, in the sense of illegibility. Be present, be engaged, be intelligent and capable. Let these things be unmistakable, but let the precise form of your desire remain unclear. Let the specific nature of your reserves, what you know that you have not used, what you could do that you have not done, remain entirely yours. Men fear the dark not because darkness is inherently dangerous, but because they cannot see what it contains. Be that darkness, not threatening, not aggressive, simply containing more than is visible, simply capable of more than has been demonstrated. There is a final truth, and it is the most uncomfortable one. The man who is genuinely feared in the manner I have described is almost always a man who has largely stopped caring about being feared. The paradox resolves itself thus. The pursuit of fearsome status produces visible need, and visible need destroys fearsome status. But the man who has genuinely oriented himself toward something beyond the management of his reputation, who has found a purpose sufficient to command his full attention, radiates, without effort, without performance, without calculation, the specific quality of a man who cannot be reached by ordinary manipulation. That quality is what the court reads as dangerous. That quality is what the room adjusts to. That quality is what keeps men careful and watchful and reluctant to test. Not your anger, not your power, not your threats, your indifference, your calm, genuine, self-possessed indifference. Remember this. They must not fear your anger. Anger announces that they have reached you. They must not fear your power. Power can be matched, endured, or waited out. They must fear your indifference, because a man who has decided you are not worth his continued attention has already moved past you, and nothing you do afterward will bring him back.